movement in the new order in Europe, already in the preparatory stage, would be linked with a positive solution of the European Jewish problem in conformity with the above-mentioned aspirations of the Jewish people. This would extraordinarily strengthen the moral basis of the new order in the eyes of all humanity. Stern was assassinated by the British Special Forces in 1942. "45 years later, Yehoshaphat Huckabee, Israel's longest-serving director of military intelligence, offered an observation on this Zionist attempt to do business with Hitler's Germany. Perhaps for peace of mind, we ought to see this affair as an aberrant episode in Jewish history. Nevertheless, it should alert us to how far extremists may go in times of distress and where their manias may lead." It was another Jewish immigrant from Poland, Menachem Begin, who turned the Irgun into a most successful terrorist organization. The same Menachem Begin who, in 1977, would become Israel's prime minister and speed up the illegal settlement of the occupied West Bank in order to deny the Palestinians any prospect of sufficient land for a viable independent state of their own, or so he hoped. While he was restructuring and refocusing the Irgun, Begin had a message for the Gentiles of the world, and the British in particular. Lest they be unwilling to realize, or all too ready to overlook, the fact is that out of blood and fire and tears and ashes, a new specimen of human being was born. A new specimen completely unknown to the world for over 1800 years. The fighting Jew. That Jew, who the world considered dead and buried, and never to rise again, has risen, never again to go down the sides of the pit and vanish off the earth. In Cairo on the 6th of November 1944, two representatives of this new specimen of human being assassinated Lloyd Moyne, Britain's resident minister for the Middle East. In the House of Commons, Churchill responded with these words: "If our dreams for Zionism are to end in the smoke of assassins' guns, and our labours for its future produce only a new set of gangsters worthy of Nazi Germany, then many like myself will have to reconsider the position we have maintained so consistently and so long in the past." In Palestine, the Irgun concentrated on bombing British installations, facilities and communications networks of all kinds, for the purpose of making government impossible. The blowing up of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem on the 22nd of July 1946 was the most spectacular and politically important of the Irgun's operations against the occupying British. They had taken over the southern wing of this most prestigious hotel to house the central institutions of their administration. It was the very heart of British authority and power in Palestine. Ben-Gurion denied that he or Zionism's official military organizations, the Haganah and the Palmach, had anything to do with or advance knowledge of the blowing up of the King David. But he was not telling the truth. At least 91 people were killed and twice that number were injured, and Britain was humiliated. So, having made a mess of it, Britain decided to get out of Palestine by midnight on the 13th of May 1948, and it dumped the problem of what to do about Palestine into the lap of the infant United Nations. Zionist terrorism had succeeded in its mission to break Britain's will to stay.
The British administration will leave Jerusalem within a fortnight, and very shortly afterwards the last of the British troops will be out of Jerusalem.
On the 20th of November 1947, at the end of a voting process that was influenced by the Zionist lobby, the General Assembly of the UN approved by a narrow majority a resolution to partition Palestine. It was a proposal for injustice on a massive scale. If it was approved by the Security Council, 56.4% of Palestine was to be given for a Jewish state to people, many of them recently arrived alien immigrants with no biological connection to the ancient Hebrews, who constituted 33% of the population and owned 5.6% of the land. But the bare facts about the partition plan proposal itself tell only a fraction of this part of the truth of history. Without the consent of the majority of the people of Palestine, the UN did not have the right to decide to partition Palestine or assign any part of its territory to a minority of alien immigrants in order for them to establish a state of their own. Even so, the partition plan proposal approved Assembly did not become UN policy because it did not go to the Security Council for approval. Because the US believed that, if approved in the face of Arab and other Muslim opposition, it could only be implemented by force, and President Truman was not prepared to use force to partition Palestine. So the partition plan was vitiated, became invalid, and the question of what to do about Palestine was taken back to the General Assembly for more discussion. The option favoured and proposed by the US was temporary UN trusteeship.
We believe that a temporary trusteeship for Palestine should be established under the Trusteeship Council of the United Nations. In our opinion, the Security Council should recommend the establishment of such a trusteeship to the General Assembly and to the mandatory powers.
It was while the General Assembly was debating what to do that Israel unilaterally declared itself to be in existence, actually in defiance of the will of the organized international community, including the Truman administration.
This right is the natural right of the Jewish people to be masters of their own fate, like all other nations, in their own sovereign state, which would open the gates of the homeland wide to every Jew, and confer upon the Jewish people the status of a fully privileged member of the Committee of Nations. Accordingly, we members of the National Executive, representatives of the Jewish community of Eretz Israel and of the Zionist movement, are here assembled on the day of the termination of the British mandate over Eretz Israel. And by virtue of our natural and historic right, and the strength of the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly, here declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, to be known as the State of Israel.
Zionism's assertion that Israel was given its birth certificate and thus its legitimacy by the UN partition plan is a myth, propaganda nonsense. The truth of the time was that the Zionist state of Israel had no right to exist and could have no right to exist unless it was recognized and legitimized by those who were dispossessed of their land and their rights during its creation. In international law, only the Palestinians could give Israel the legitimacy it craved. And that legitimacy was the only thing Zionists could not take from the Palestinians by force.